With America's blessings, the military dictatorship of Pinochet dissolved the National Congress and suspended the Constitution. A commission appointed by Pinochet himself drafted a new constitution. The passage of the 1980 Constitution, passed practically under the gun, gave Pinochet the presidency until 1989. The Constitution also provided for a national vote in 1988 on whether to keep the general in power for another 8 years. In 1988, only the name of Pinochet appears on the ballot. The Chilean outsmarted the general and voted no, with 54.5% opposed to Pinochet. The following year, the people of Chile elected Patricia Osorka, a Christian Democrat, to office in a peaceful and truly democratic election. During the 18 years of the Pinochet regime, all forms of opposition were suppressed. Political parties, labor organizations, freedom of speech, and all civil rights were denied. Thousands of people were openly killed or declared missing. Their families never knew what happened to them. Even today, these victims are called the disappeared. Pinochet's economic measure did not restore the nation to prosperity. There was widespread unemployment, poverty, foreign debt grew enormously, and the economy lost ground. Opposition to the dictatorship grew.
Commercial seaport in Chile, filled with the hustle and bustle of goods coming in and going out. This soft-spoken professor of economics is very proud of his role in making that happen. Rolf Luders helped Chile open its markets to the world.
First Chicago boys went, I think, in 56 or 57.
So named for where they did graduate work, the University of Chicago, where they studied the doctrines of privatization and free markets under its Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman. Those first Chicago boys were academics, says Luders. Until 1973, when Chile's President Salvador Allende was overthrown in a military coup, and the general who ousted him, strongman Augusto Pinochet, went to overturn the country's centralist economy.
And so they turned around and said, well, who can help us?
And suddenly, the Chicago boys were putting theory into practice.
What the Chicago boys did is to transform the centralized economy we had in 1973 into a modern market economy.
Empowered by a dictator and moved into key positions of government, they had an unprecedented ability to take ideas learned in America and use them to reshape the Chilean economy. And their primary mission was to get the government out of the business of owning businesses.
They denationalized the auto industry and telecommunications, sold most of the country's copper rights to private companies, and eliminated government price controls on Chile's goods. Reforms that have stayed largely intact ever since. U.S. figures show Chile now has one of the most open trading regimes in the world. For Pinochet over the years, Luders is among many economists who say their policies worked. Chile's crippling inflation rate, reportedly 350% or more, was brought down to just 20% by 1989 and is currently around 4%. The poverty rate, which at its worst stood at 46%, was cut by more than half and is now about 14%. Chile today is, by some economic measures, the most prosperous nation in South America.
In Chile, well, we had...
Strong government is one way of putting it. Brutal dictatorship is another. Chile's wall of names lists some of the thousands of political opponents murdered, tortured, or exiled by Pinochet. Do you have any qualms about working for Pinochet?
Well,
1998 while on a visit for surgery in London, Pinochet was arrested for extradition at the request of a Spanish judge for the execution of Spanish citizens under his regime. He was later released after intervention by a former member of the Thatcher government. On arriving in Santiago, he was put under house arrest by a Chilean judge on over 300 charges, ranging from human rights violations to corruption and embezzlement. He was not convicted on any of them, as he died of a heart problem in 2006. Before his death, he wrote a statement of personal responsibility for all the brutality happening under his regime. He asked that his body be cremated and scattered so as to avoid vandalism on his tomb.
acaban de detener los policías. Pero no, eso es preventivo. ¿Por qué lo esperamos, bueno? ¿Sí? Todo policía. Claro, así saben de lo que estáis hablando y usan las palabras clave del nuevo orden mundial y buscan la weá y después los weones que tienen una bomba falsa los pasan a nosotros.
Police dispersed thousands of students on the streets of Santiago on the first day of a national education strike. These university students believe Chile's educational system is in crisis.
We want the government to regulate the private industry that higher education has become. Before students give their money to these private institutions, their profit, fees, and quality must be regulated.
Chile's university fees are, on average, among the highest in the world.
We have today education for poor people and education for rich people. We need to integrate the different students into the same education.
This protest movement has gained steam, especially in the past few weeks. The students say now that if their demands are not met, this strike will become open-ended.
Chile's educational model has changed drastically in the last 40 years. Before the Pinochet dictatorship that began in the early 70s, as much as 90% of university budgets came from the state. Now that figure is around 10%. Students worry that the most recent education reform, pushed through Congress by the right-wing government of Sebastián Piñera, amounts to a complete privatization of Chile's universities.
Estamos dispuestos a hacer una reforma.
We're willing to do a major reform of higher education. We know more resources are needed. We know the students need them most.
Lavín has held talks with some student leaders, but the principal groups behind these protests are demanding more specific action immediately.
El tiempo la
Copper is very important in our modern society. That metal can be shaped into various forms easily. It is widely used in electrical wiring because of its high conductivity property. It is also very poisonous to bacteria and is widely used for water pipes. 99% of copper reserves in the world are located in the Andes region of Chile, Peru, in Zambia, Africa, and in the United States. For many decades, copper was a main export for Chile. As a result, Chile continued to have a budget surplus since 1988. 1/3 of the Chilean government revenue comes from copper exports.
This is it. This is what it's all about. Copper. The most contentious commodity in Zambia, and there's no shortage of it. And this is Kensan Mine, the 8th largest copper mine in the world. And the scale of this is really quite phenomenal. This pit is 170 meters deep. It is 3.5 kilometers in length and 1.5 kilometers in width. And close by, there's another pit. And when the two combine, it will run for 7 kilometers. All of this is expected to last for the next 20 years. And after that, there's more. But who gains from this extraordinary resource? Is it the Zambian people for whom poverty remains a crushing reality? Or is it the global consumer whose insatiable demand for the world's resources cannot be easily met?
Or is it the shareholders and investors in this lucrative resource?
The company is targeting a production figure of 400,000 tons by the year 2014-2015. It can only mean that the company will make more money. And if it makes more money and is able to control its costs, it will make more profit. And the more profit that the company makes, the more tax we're going to be able to pay to government. So it's a win-win situation, really, if you think about it in those terms.
The winners are definitely the investors. If you have been in Zambia for a few days, you realize that there's much talk on the contribution of the mining sector, and people are crying, civil society is crying, the private sector is also crying to say, why is it that we have so much production now of copper at such a price, and yet the contribution still remains minimal. If you go to the copper belt right now, you see the dilapidated infrastructure, the road network is very poor. The people in those areas are very poor.
Human Rights Watch released a report that severely criticizes Chinese copper mining companies in Zambia for exploiting miners and ignoring workers' rights. According to the report, Chinese state-owned mining corporations are consistently violating Zambian laws and international regulations.
Chinese state-owned copper mining companies in Zambia are being severely criticized by an international rights group. A Human Rights Watch report released on November 3rd states Chinese mining firms frequently violate Zambian and international labor laws and regulations.
So we found that there were consistent threats to fire employees that refused to work in unsafe places underground. So miners would recognize an area underground as being unsafe, not want to go ahead with the work, and the Chinese manager would actually threaten the worker that he'd be fired if he didn't go ahead.
The 122-page report titled, "You'll Be Fired If You Refuse," contains a comprehensive account on how these companies exploit Zambian miners. The violations include poor health and dangerous working environments and long shifts from 12 to 18 hours of hard labor. The report identifies China Non-Ferrous Metals Mining Corporation, CNMC, a Chinese state-owned corporation, as the parent company of the 4 mining companies. It's compiled from recent interviews with miners from 3 on-site visits. The report cites the miners saying, quote, "They just consider production, not safety. If someone dies, he can be replaced tomorrow," end quote. Miners report managers bribing or threatening workers to stop them from reporting accidents to the Zambian government Mine Safety Department. The head of Human Rights Campaign in China says the Chinese regime exports its bad practices.
Communist China is now spreading its predatory concept a number of ways via social disruption overseas.
They focus only on establishing rapport with the foreign government. Rights Watch Africa Director Daniel Bekele says many of the violations found in Zambia's Chinese state-owned mines reflect the same kind of abuses as those in China.